I'm Father Robert Lauder, a professor of philosophy at St. John's University, a priest of the Diocese of Brooklyn. In this Catholic novel series today, we are going to deal with Walker Percy's novel, The Moviegoer. Now, let me begin with a couple of personal anecdotes. I teach existentialism at St. John's University. And as soon as someone hears, this has happened to me so many times, someone asks, what do you teach? I say, existentialism. I can predict the next question is, what is existentialism? So here's what I think it is. There are two types of existentialists, those who believe in God and those who don't. The existentialists who don't believe in God say we are creating ourselves by our own choices. We're alone in the universe, and this is what we choose makes us who we are. So that would be a perfect example of that would be Jean-Paul Sartre. A theistic existentialist like Gabriel Marcel would say we are co-creating ourselves with God. God's freedom and our freedom make us who we are. Whether you're an atheistic existentialist or a theistic existentialist, tremendous emphasis on freedom. As far as I know, Walker Percy is the only American Catholic existentialist novelist in the 20th century. I first came upon Walker Percy in some scholarly articles he had written about language. And I always remember the name, Walker Percy, because I've never met anybody with the first name Walker. And then I was reading a Catholic magazine, and I saw that he had written a novel, and it was this novel, The Moviegoer. So I was determined to read it. Then Percy wrote 5 more novels. I read them all. And somehow I knew that I was going to write a book about him, so I did, and I called it that, Walker Percy, Prophetic Existentialist Catholic Storyteller. So I really like this man's writing. Here's what the New York Times said when this book came out. Mr. Percy is a breathtakingly brilliant writer. Walker Percy, I think, he was a doctor, he was in pre-med, and I think he embraced the philosophy of scientism, which is basically only statements of positive science, empirical science, are true. Only statements as physics or chemistry or biology. Those are the only true statements. I'm pretty sure that's what he held. And then he is stricken with tuberculosis when he's an intern. He was doing work at the Bellevue Hospital in New York, gets stricken with tuberculosis, and he has at least a 2-year recuperative period. And in that period, he reads the existentialist philosophers. He reads Heidegger, he reads Sartre, he reads Camus, he reads Jean-Paul Sartre, he reads Gabriel Marcel. When he is healed, he never practices medicine. He marries a nurse, and within a year after studying religion, they both become Catholics. As I said, he writes these scholarly articles, I read them, but he feels that he wants to reach a wider audience. He thinks he's got something to say, and he wants to reach a wider audience. And I think he has. I think the 6 novels are brilliant. I think the most brilliant is this one, The Moviegoer, the first. Binks Bowling is the main character. He's going to be 30 years old on Ash Wednesday. He's engaging in a search. He says, what is the search? It's what anyone would do when they realize they are stuck in everydayness. I would translate that this way, when they have lost any sense of transcendence. So Binks looks for it by going to movies, and for a while, movies work, but eventually they don't. He's got to find it some other way. Now, I would interpret this novel this way. Structurally, it's modeled on Søren Kierkegaard's philosophy, and in terms of content, it's modeled on Gabriel Marcel's philosophy, 2 existentialists. Now, you don't have to know that to enjoy the novel, but if you know it, you might enjoy it. Kierkegaard claimed everybody was on one of 3 levels of existence. He called the first the aesthetic, he called the second the ethical, he called the third the religious. The aesthetic is commitment to sense pleasure. The best wine, the best sexual experience, the best ballet, the best opera, but all this worldly, no sense of the transcendent at all. Now, Kierkegaard said if you live that life completely, the logical outcome is suicide. Why? Because you're looking for salvation where you're not going to find it. The best opera in the world doesn't save you. The best ballet in the world doesn't save you. The most fulfilling sexual experience doesn't save you. So you can leap to the next stage. What is that? The ethical. Tremendous sense on duty, tremendous emphasis on duty, obligation, commitment. So the person on the ethical level says to the person on the aesthetic level, everything good you have, we have, but better. So an emphasis on law, an emphasis on vows. However, this doesn't save you either. And so then you can leap to the third stage. So when you hear this expression, a Kierkegaardian leap, it almost always means a leap from the first to the third stage or from the second to the third stage. And on the third stage, you make a commitment to Christ. Okay, Binks Bowling at the beginning of this novel is on the aesthetic stage. He periodically sleeps with his secretaries, but he's not fulfilled by this. He's on a search. He's trying to figure out, what does it all mean? What does it all add up to? Now, in the novel, his Aunt Emily is a perfect example of someone on the ethical stage. She says, you know, you do your duty, you do what's right, you keep your promises, it's almost a kind of a stoicism. Stiff upper lip, life may let you down, but you don't quit, you don't give up. And that's not enough for Binks. He wants something more. So the structure is Kierkegaardian, but the content is Marcel. Marcel says, when we love other people, we meet God. So in 5 of the 6 novels, the main character, it's always a man, the main character finds God through commitment to a woman. Actually all 6 novels are love stories. The one that doesn't, in which the main character doesn't find fulfillment is called Lancelot. Very, very good novel, but I think Moviegoer is better, okay? It's a demanding novel in this sense. You're not quite sure where he's going, but if you plug in right away that he's on a search, then the whole novel fits in, okay? It makes sense. So at the end of the novel, he marries his Kate, who's the heroine in the novel, and there's a kind of an epilogue. Now, has Binks become a Catholic? It's really interesting. I teach this novel at St. John's University, and some kids miss it. They miss the ending. Through his commitment to this woman, Kate, who has really a number of neurotic problems, that he's going to commit to her, he's going to be with her for life, he's really going to save her, he's really going to redeem her, he finds Christ through that. But some of these students don't quite get it. They think the ending is ambiguous. I don't think it is at all. I think if you follow the whole novel, I think it's quite clear. Now, you'd be surprised at how many people say to me, how is Percy Walker? They invert the names, okay? So I really feel that I almost know Walker Percy. I was working on a book on Ingmar Bergman, and I wrote to Percy, and I said, I'm writing on this book, would you read it and perhaps write something for the cover? He said, sure, just send it. So I sent him the manuscript, and a month or 2 went by, and I thought, oh, I guess he's not going to do it. And then I was on retreat, and I went into the recreation room, and I picked up the New York Times, and I saw a picture of Walker Percy. And I remember this so clearly, I thought, oh no, and he had died. And I presume that's why he hadn't, sent a note to me for my book, because he probably was suffering from cancer at that time. So I said Mass for him the next day, and then I made up my mind I was going to write a book about him, because I felt I had really studied the works, and I really knew him as well as anybody did. So I did write the book, as I mentioned before, Walker Percy, Prophetic Existentialist Catholic Storyteller. It seems to me what Percy is saying is especially important today. I keep running into people who seem to be quite content and quite comfortable without asking ultimate questions, without asking, what does it all add up to? A couple of years ago, I gave a lecture at the Catholic Worker over in the Bowery, and after I talked about the mystery of God, the mystery of the human person, and afterwards, a young man got up. There were a couple of students from a Catholic university. He got up and he said, I don't believe in God. I don't believe there's a life beyond the grave. And I'm not worried about that. And I don't spend my time thinking about it. As a matter of fact, I never think about it. And I thought that was a perfect description of the people that Walker Percy is writing about, and the people for whom Walker Percy was writing. Encouraging them motivating them, challenging them to go on a search. That there's more to human life, there's more to human existence than we usually believe. Now, so I don't know what your image of existentialism is. I think probably the atheistic existentialists are more well known, and so I think existentialists say life is absurd. No, not all of them. Kierkegaard actually says Christ is absurd. Now, he doesn't mean Christ doesn't make any sense at all. He means there is so much meaning and so much mystery in Christ, we will never understand him completely, even after we make this commitment. The only other Christian thinker I know who ever referred to Christ as absurd was Tertullian. So this third stage, once we make this leap, we are certain we have met Christ, though we can't explain that to anyone, and we certainly can't prove it to anyone, and we cannot understand Christ completely, ever, okay? So Percy is really calling us into mystery. In addition to the novels he wrote, he has a book of essays, and in one of them he interviews himself. And he explains, he says, I'm interviewing myself because most interviewers don't ask the right questions. So I think it's quite humorous, okay? One of the questions is, are you a Catholic writer? The answer, well, I'm a Catholic and I'm a writer, so I guess I'm a Catholic writer. Well, do you believe what the Catholic Church teaches? I do. You do? How can you possibly believe that in today's day and age? And then Percy the interviewee says, well, what else is there? And then Percy the interviewer names about 10 way out religions. And Walker Percy the interviewee says, that's what I mean. So the interview, I think, is quite funny. And at one point he says, the religion has let black people down. It's as though God gave us one simple rule: treat the black person with dignity. And instead we went over and kidnapped slaves and so on. This is the great sin of the white race. So, I mean, there are many ideas floating around. I would say Percy is a kind of a philosopher, but he also writes excellent novels. Once I give the students at the university some keys, everybody gets the point of the novel. And I think in another course I teach, I have them read one Percy novel. And the reason I do that is this. I'm trying to get students to see philosophy is not just in textbooks. Philosophy is not just even in the famous philosophers, Thomas Aquinas and St. Anselm and Descartes and Kant. No, philosophy is in literature. And I'm trying to get them to see that. And I'm glad to say they do. They do get it. They're very happy that they've read a Percy novel. So if you want to read one Percy novel, take a crack at The Moviegoer.